Welcome to another edition of Fortinet Live. I'm Jim Richberg, and I'm joined by Derek Manky from FortinetLIVE. Today, we're discussing the threat landscape for state and local government. Derek, welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, Jim. Great to speak with you. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, Eric. So, Derek, what do you see as the state of the threat landscape for state and local governments today?
Yeah, so Jim, it's a ongoing conversation that I know you and I have had, but I've been having certainly with other CISOs as well, and top of mind in state, and particularly is this expanded attack surface. You know, we've talked about the rise of APC or advanced persistent cybercrime before. Of course, you know they've had to, in that sector, they've had to really focus on APTs in the past, targeted attacks, right? Destructive attacks that are typically going after high value assets. But now we also have cybercrime that is really ramping up in terms of targeted attacks, destructive attacks, modeling beyond just ransomware and ransom as a service. So that's certainly a driver, that I see out there. Another one, of course, is on the threat landscape is the rise of crime services as well too. There's more simply more players coming to the table now. We're not talking about a handful. We're talking about 50. Some of these larger ransom as a service operations, as an example, 50 to 100 people easily within an organization. So with that comes more tactics, more techniques, more the TTPs, right?
Yeah, it's almost like script kiddies have been reborn as franchisees for some of these ransomware concerns. That
Yeah.
it's the franchise model taken to a different degree. But in my conversations with state and local government, I think the top of mind threat for pretty much everybody has been ransomware.
Yeah.
And as you said, ransomware, because of its relatively consistent success, has fueled this rise of advanced persistent crime, the getting left of getting farther up the kill chain, becoming more persistent, more stealthy, and taking on those kind of characteristics that we've always said. You have advanced persistent threats against these kinds of government targets, and then you have criminals, and there's a real bar between them. And I think we both see that bar is blurred at this point.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's blurred because it's moving fast, Jim. As you know, right? There is, as I said, not just ransomware, of course, is top of mind, but beyond ransomware, now we have a compounded effect, right? And that's something I'm seeing with, again, the data wipers, some more destructive attacks as well too. Ransomware, of course, was born out of data cryptors, but then the double extortion, triple extortion model came out, and the data wiper component is just another part on top of that. So of course the risk is continuing to elevate as well.
Yeah, and I tell state and local government CISOs that they need cyber threat intelligence. The reality is most of them are consumers of it, and they want to consume
Mhm.
it in an automated fashion because certainly for local government, I don't need the fingers of all my of both hands to be able to say how many local governments really have cyber threat analysts. They really need this to be a turnkey service. But I tell them if they think of ransomware only as that threat that encrypts their data, they're missing that double, triple extortion aspect you
Yeah.
talk about, that all the timely offline backups in the world aren't going to help you against the threat that is doxing your citizens, selling their PII on the dark web.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of threat that requires a different kind of response. So Derek, how do you see the threat landscape for state and local government compared to other sectors? Is it the same? Is it different? What is it?
Yeah, I would say that there is a lot of similarities for sure, and we see this across the board, right? Between certainly the private sector, but if we look at state and local government in particular, again, they have this sort of snowball effect where it's a bigger piece of the pie, right? It's a bigger attack surface now to worry about because of everything that we just talked about. So there are a lot of similarities. Ransomware, of course, is across the board as well too. But there are some key differences, right? So the things that we've talked about now moving forward with incident reporting, as an example, it's something that's going to be a game changer, as well as the collaboration model, private and public sector collaboration, right? This is something that for the threat landscape component becomes a critical movement that needs to happen, right? To be able to identify these threats, mitigate them in real time, because it's a lot of volume that, that's a big difference because of that expanded attack surface we're seeing too.
Yeah. We always talk about cybersecurity as that the mix of people, process, and technology. And
Mm,
from my perspective, the public sector, especially state and local government, lags on two of those three. People. They're never going to hire enough people. They can't
yeah.
compete. We have a global shortage. We're getting better at it. We're closing the gap, but it's still short. And government can never compete with the private sector on salaries. So they're going to lag on people. They need to find other ways of augment it. Technology. Yes, there may be parts of government, typically at the national level, that innovate on technology, but because of
Mm,
resources and because of lengthy procurement cycles, as a rule, government is farther behind the technology curve than the private sector is. On the other hand, I think government does okay on the process side. We're all busy implementing zero trust as an operating model, and zero trust
mhm.
came out of government. We all work with the cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF, again, a
Yeah.
model created by government. So, of the three, government has a good ability to frame things in a way that allow them to integrate, but they need help really on providing the tools and providing the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And actionable data at that as well. We talk about this, and that's, as you mentioned, the turnkey solution, right? How do you, this is always a challenge. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of threat feeds, things like that. But again, if you don't have a solution in place or an effective SOC to integrate that, escalate paths, provide alerts, provide mitigation as well through orchestration, certainly leveraging ML and AI as well too. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about the challenge governments face within a jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a
Mm,
local government, that they are increasingly being challenged to integrate security across that jurisdiction. And doing multi organization security shares all the challenges of doing enterprise security. And it
yeah.
adds a couple of other ones. One is governance and one is capacity. Typically, no one is genuinely in charge. Somebody may have the title of director of an operation, but I say the asset test is, can you direct people to do something? Can you either
Mm,
provide a tool? Can you make them report a certain way? If not, you really are the cat herder in chief. And the second
mhm.
challenge is you're trying to level set across components that frankly tend to differ more in capability than they do within an organization. I deal with people in local government who they don't even have IT staff who are government employees, much less cybersecurity staff. So you're trying to level set, including players who essentially have no capacity. So those are the kinds of challenges I think that are especially pronounced for government. So, Derek, we've talked about the threat landscape as it is now.
Mm.
What are the top three trends you see that government CISOs should pay attention to as we get into 2023?
Yeah, so certainly shoring up more proactive measures, right? So looking more to, you talked about moving up the kill chain, as a result of everything that we talked about with the targeted attacks and more destructive attacks and the elevated risk. It is becoming more important to pay attention to certainly automation, integration of that threat intelligence, like we talked about, but shoring up defense more on the harder to solve challenges on the left. So, particularly if we look at the phases of reconnaissance, weaponization, so the zero-day threat weaponization, being able to have early detection for these things is key, right? Because oftentimes now, especially with data wipers coming on the scene, which we are seeing much more of in FortiGuard Labs, the it's often the collateral damage is quite significant in early phases of an attack, right? So that's one aspect, but we still can't, I don't want all the focus just to be on one side of that, right? We still
Yeah.
can't lose focus, of course, of having proactive measures for incident response planning. Asset management is another one as well too. You talked about that multi-tenanted environment really that happens at this level, similar to MSSPs, right? Being able to know where your assets are, what are at high risk, and then having a proper strategy around those, because those in reality are the ones that are being poked and prodded by cyber criminals now on a daily basis as well.
Right. I think this is a good news, bad news story for government. The good
Mm,
news is there's more attention being paid to cybersecurity, both by the public, by leaders in government, and by, frankly, appropriators, the people who give them those resources. So, we've had this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the bipartisan in infrastructure law in the U.S., both of which brought money to cybersecurity,
mm.
and a lot of that is going to fall to state and even more so local government to execute, or to give to private sector partners to execute. That's the good news. The
Yeah.
challenge that I'm experiencing as I deal with these people is they really don't have the project management skills to be able. This is not like building a road where
Mm,
we know the milestones, we know how to implement, that we know when a project falls behind, what to look for. They don't tend to be as well postured with the human skills in government to do that on cybersecurity. So we're going to have a problem with that. And then another one that you and I have talked about in the past is supply chain. Supply
yeah.
chain
Yeah.
vulnerabilities, hardware, software, services. SolarWinds and its brethren are something where I think state and local government are going to rely either on us in the private sector or on the federal government to point them in the direction of solutions. So
Yeah.
we talked a lot. We talked about threats. What do you see about edge and OT? We talk about smart cities. We talk about all of these infrastructures are going to increasingly be digital, increasingly be talking to each other. That's operational technology. So, what if I were a government CISO should I worry about on that in 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, speaking of supply chain, that's one aspect of it. But on top of that, looking at, I mean, it's a complex attack surface, as you know. And in fact, from FortiGuard Labs, what we see specific with the threat to OT and that landscape is that it is the number one threat driver that we're seeing. This was born from the early days of IoT, moving now into a lot of the integration we're seeing with the convergence of IT and OT systems, right? So that is something to definitely pay attention to, and that is it's the culprit isn't necessarily these, black box hardened devices that are coming out that that are certainly on the front lines for operational technology, but a lot of that integration behind things between IT systems. It only takes, again, it's a chain, just like a supply chain, but even on you think of integration and APIs and services that, by the way, are at target for ransom. Any one of those that goes down effectively breaks that chain. And that's a resilience conversation as well, too. So, looking, it certainly is a very valid threat that we see on the OT landscape. Again, it's complex, unfortunately, because of the supply chain you mentioned, because of all these just different assets that are now integrated and talking to each other, and also convergent between IT and OT as well, too. We still see a lot of these springboard attacks, right, that are going into IT environments that are doing more reconnaissance, again, looking for lateral movement, living off the land attacks that they can do to get into OT systems. And again, unfortunately, these OT systems, the ones that are production environments, of course, are the ones that are now being targeted because of those enhanced playbooks that cyber criminals are focused on.
Right. And we talk about the kinds of OT that many in the public sector deal with, and it ranges for
Mm.
everything from traffic light synchronization
Yeah.
to things that directly affect public health and safety. Like, we saw last year waterworks being targeted. And these are
Mhm.
small utilities that, they're not well resourced either with money or with cyber talent. So they really, they represent a threat, and I think a lot of them don't feel they have good solutions. So what are cyber solutions that public sector CISOs should look to try to maximize to increase their protection in 2023?
Yeah, so we talked about the importance of this turnkey aspect, Jim, earlier. So certainly having orchestration, automation, SIM and SOAR are two that come top of mind, right? Because this is something that, again, they complement each other well, right? You have threat intelligence, you have detection events, and you have an automated playbook response to that. So you don't have to have a 10 operating headcount within a SOC and train them to do this. Again, nothing is ever 100%, but it's going to take care of that 90 percentile plus, right? On top of that, looking at, of course, The harder to solve challenges, right, for these targeted attacks that are happening now, solutions such as deception, DRPS as well too, digital risk protection services, because again, knowing what attackers are up to, are they looking at at your networks? What does their playbook look like? Those are also important. But then going back to the turnkey model, SOC as a service, right? We talked about cybercrime services and how cyber criminals are developing the as a service model on their side. The good news is, of course, from our side, we have next generation SOC enablement, SOC as a service, things that are turnkey that again can be fully leveraged out of the box.
Yeah. And when I worked with the public sector, I think there is a common misperception that most of these organizations have a SOC. When they're of a certain size, they do. But the reality is, again, you have small government departments, even in big governments, that this has to be collectivized. The jurisdiction may have one, but for
Mm,
the others, to your point, Derek, it's got to be either consumed as a service or they need to regionalize. They need to federalize to be able to get to those economies of scale, those critical mass to be able to say, we're even set up to consume the kinds of cyber threat intelligence that FortiGuard Labs can give us, but left to their own, the five-person department that does fill in the blank, that's too small to do other than to say the devices themselves are automatically provisioned. They automatically, benefit from cyber threat intelligence. They generate tips that we're able to evaluate. But
yeah.
there's an issue of size and scale, and I think it's AI driven automation. Uh, Government is discovering AI. Robotic process automation is coming on fast, and I tell them it's had that equally transformational impact on our business in cybersecurity. But guess what? You can consume it as a product and a service, whether it's as a standalone thing or whether
Yep.
it's the fact that look, how much of the threat intelligence that you produce at FortiGuard Labs is generated by machine, right? Virtually all
Yeah.
of it now.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then
It's a stack model, right? I mean, I always refer to this as the good old OSI security model, right? Where you have automation, machine learning, AI, and then obviously we still need the humans on top. But that's a funnel. It's an escalation path and funnel,
correct.
and I think every organization needs to be set up that way.
Yeah, it's all about people, process, and technology. Well, Derek,
Mhm.
this has been a good opportunity to use the crystal ball and look forward, and hopefully we can do another one of these the end of the year, and we can keep score and see how accurate we were. But thanks for your time. As always, I enjoy our conversations, and let's keep collaborating on this people, process, and technology for collective security. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.